Welcome to the Coach's Hot Seat podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Coach's Hot Seat podcast with Mark Haines, commissioner and publisher of Coach's Hot Seat, the platform that tracks every FBS coach in America by performance, pressure, and contract reality. The pressure is already building across college football, and several major programs enter 2026 facing difficult questions. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today, Mark and I are continuing our discussion and our breakdown of the 2026 preseason Coach's Hot Seat rankings. Mark, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Sean. Thanks for having me today.
Oh no, I love it. I'm not the biggest fan in the world or knowledgeable in that sense, but it's fascinating some of the preseason cogitation and machinations that have to happen. My first question is around Dave Aranda, right? And he's still, he's at Baylor, right? He's still cashing a paycheck there, despite the fact that the trajectory is pointing in the wrong direction. Why do you think that is?
Well, Dave was the beneficiary of a couple things. He had one really good season, and he's continued to cash that check for that great season since then. He also was the beneficiary of timing. His athletic director resigned probably the day that they would have terminated Dave. And so the university president decided, she didn't want to run a coaching search at the same time that she was running an athletic director search. So they kept him for this season. And, Dave's a nice guy, and, he's a really good person. But I don't know that, he's a head coach.
Interesting. So you heard it here first. Tune in a couple months. What about Matt Rhule? Why is his expected 3-year leap in Nebraska not played out the way so many people expected? There are those expectations again coming into play.
Yeah, expectations are always driving a lot of this here. So, fortunately for Matt, he has an athletic director who I think understands. They signed him to an extension. He flirted with Penn State, that flirted with him a little bit, and they wanted to keep him. So they signed him to an extension, even though things haven't played out exactly the way that everyone would have hoped. Matt Rhule is also the beneficiary of expectations that he set based on a couple of other places. So the most recent was Baylor, interestingly enough, where in year 3 his teams really produced. They there was year 1 where it looked a little better. Year 2 looked a little better than year 1, and then year 3 they really came on.
Yeah, you start to groove.
Right, exactly. The environment's a little bit different than it was in those two particular instances. Players didn't transfer like they do now. He didn't have the opportunity to go get players through the portal like he could have. Fortunately, the athletic director said, I don't think this is a 3-year thing. It's probably more like a 5-year thing. That's kind of how they're approaching it. Nebraska fans are really that's a great fan base, and they're being very patient. They've been patient for a long time, but they're continuing to be hopeful that Matt's program will eventually come into fruition. I think it has a good chance of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you can't. There's so many variables, and the coach can't control most of them, in fact. But it seems like a 3-year turnaround, right? Year 1, you go in, you're meeting people for the first time, you're introducing a new system, you're gonna throw some things in the trash and introduce some new things. In year 2, you start to hone that, and then not even accounting for new personnel. And then year 3, finally, everybody knows how to dance together, right?
Yeah, that's been the traditional thought process. I think it's extended out a little bit longer now because of the portal and because of the NIL payments that can be made to players now, and things are just a lot more fluid. When you had one group, when you had one team that you could count on, the next year and then the year after that.
Yeah.
But a good chunk of the team transfers now. And, over half of those players that go to transfer don't get another deal. So it's not always a great thing for them. It's not just they can go somewhere and it's going to work out. It usually doesn't.
Yeah, that's the double-edged sword of all that. That's interesting. What about Greg Schiano? Why does his situation at Rutgers create such an unusual conversation? Speaking of, expectations and success, what have you seen there?
Well, Schiano's on his second stint at Rutgers. And the first stint was very successful. And he went on to coach in the NFL, and, Rutgers had seen more success than I think it had ever seen. So this time around, he's come back and it's not quite worked out the same way. But the expectation is that it will. And he's been given a lot of leeway.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem to be producing the same results as it did the last time for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about. There's the NIL, there's the portal, the teams are much more fluid. This has become a much more difficult job because of that.
Totally different climate than his previous success, really, right?
Exactly.
What about Odom, right? Why do you rank Barry Odom at a 10, given the patience of the fans?
It really has to do with how quickly they pulled the gun the last time. They got rid of the last guy very, very quickly, and you replaced him with Barry Odom. And again, you're in an environment that is very fluid. And things don't often go the way that you expect them to go. Now, Barry Odom has produced in this environment. He had at UNLV. His first year, was a lot like his first year at Purdue. They didn't win a lot. The second year, they came on really strong, and they looked like a really, really good team. So he has a really good chance of doing it. But on the off chance that it doesn't go that way, the Purdue administration has shown that they're not patient and they'll replace somebody very quickly. So that is really why we ranked him a 10, was that he needs to win. So the pressure is on there, and not from the fans. The fans are supportive. They understand that he needs some time.
Speaking of expectations and patience, Mark, why do some coaches' fans want someone gone? Like they think it's time for a change, but things are actually okay, where the coach is sitting.
A lot of that has to do with the buyouts. That's why, Norvell's still at Florida State. The buyout is too much for the school to pay. So that seat's not as hot as you might think, or it hasn't been as hot as one might think. Because the buyout's just too expensive.
Right. So it's a matter of like the business aspect of the game, right? Which as a fan, you're like, look at his record, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, but also look at the contract, look at the budget for the department, etc.
Yeah, if you're paying a $50 million buyout, that's $50 million that you don't have to spend on facilities, on coaching salaries, on all kinds of other stuff. So you want to really think before you pull the trigger on that. And that's why agents have and coaches have demanded those buyout figures.
Those contracts, yeah.
Yeah, right. In this environment, 3 years might not be enough time to turn a team around, where traditionally it has been. And, so they want a little extra time. Or, it's a situation like Lincoln Riley walked into at USC, where they had a series of bad athletic directors who made bad decisions, who fired coaches on a whim, and they wanted some security.
What I hear in some of this too is, and this happens in other industries, if I may use the term, and that like the climate has changed. That with the portal, as you mentioned, and the other agreements. It's not the contracts, if you will. The business model hasn't caught up with what the reality of the situation is on the ground. Like, am I reading that right?
Yeah, you are. And in some cases, the the athletic director wants to make a hire, right? So their motivation is to, and so they agree to stuff that they, any rational person probably wouldn't. You saw that at Kentucky, and Mark Stoops had a buyout that he just had to wait for them to come to him. He wasn't about to quit. They were in a position where they were going to have to fire him, even if he was miserable.
What about the coaches with stronger records? Why do they sometimes carry more pressure than people realize?
Oh, that's a good one. So you take a situation like Dabo Swinney's got at Clemson right now, where he really he put that program at a different level. He really moved it. And I was talking to a coach one time who said, I only stay at a place 7 years because after 7 years, the expectations are so unreasonable and they've forgotten anything I've done here. So I move on after 7 years. And that's kind of the situation Dabo Swinney's in. He really, produced for them. He, and again, he hired a coordinator who was a spread coordinator. He kind of wanted to be innovative with the offense. Not quite worked out. He's replaced him. It's going back to some basics. There's been some criticism with his embracing of the portal, whether he's just too old-fashioned. Yeah, I don't know any of that. I just know that he did a great job at Clemson, and he put them really at a different level than they'd ever been before. But that creates its own set of expectations that may be unrealistic.
I mean, it's it's the old cliche, familiarity breeds contempt, and that
Yeah.
the memories are short, and it's like, do you have any idea how hard this is and how much we accomplished? And I mean, statistically speaking, you can't win all the time, as much as you hate to hear it,
Yeah.
I'm going to end with this, and that, just like why do these rankings continue shifting so quickly once the season begins?
That's by design. We shift them, and because you really have to see the product on the field. And when teams can change as quickly as they can now, I mean, Kurt Cignetti went into Indiana, and really, the bulk of that team was new. They had either come with him from James Madison, or they transferred from somewhere else, or they had been there before. It was a real mixture, right? So you don't know what you're dealing with until they start playing games.
Yeah. Well, even the people that have been there before are going to be different when you put them in a new context, of course, right?
Exactly. So we really want to see the team. We want to see the team play. We want to see, where they're strong, where they're weak, and that does move things around quite a bit. So the rankings really move around a lot in September. October, they sort of stabilize, and as the season goes on, and by November, we get a pretty good picture of who may be making a coaching change and who may not.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of changes that you don't expect. I mean, James Franklin got fired in the middle of the season last year from Penn State, and that shocked everybody. You didn't expect to see that Penn State would fire the coach in the middle of the season, especially that coach.
Right.
There's some frustration at Penn State because they called him Big Game James. He didn't win the big games. But he was a steady force for them, and God, the guy was a real ambassador for Penn State. He really represented them well.
Well, and it's that whole argument for, why we put so much focus on these programs, right? Which, in that they are the halo effect. And then to get rid of that guy, you're like, okay, well, that undermines some of that argument. And as we record this, it's June. So we're on the cusp of July. So interesting. We're already, I hate the idea of looking ahead to November, but so be it.
It'll be here faster than you think.
I know. Well, listen, we got to wrap up for this episode, Mark. But as always, thanks for your insights and your passion. I look forward to connecting in the future.
Likewise.
That's it for today's episode of the Coach's Hot Seat podcast. You can find Mark's latest rankings and analysis at his website, coacheshotseat.com. Subscribe, share the show. Check back next time as we track the pressure, politics, and decisions shaping college football. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.